one of the things that you've heard is that, and this was one of the things that Yvette Carnot kind of went in on in her video, Pan-Africanism is Dead, that Africa is not a country, it's a continent, and a very divided continent of, she says, 54 different countries who don't even relate to each other, they don't like each other, they don't have no conversation, it's pure war and beef between them, and they're disconnected, they're not united. So why are we trying to unite with them? So mull that over, yeah, in terms of why is it with all the fractured relationships on the African continent, and the fact that there really is no legal entity called African in today's world, why do Pan-Africanists harp on this identity of African? This is who we are African, and the idea also that Africans on the continent don't refer to themselves as African. This is only us in the diaspora with our uppity kind of utopian ideals of what it means to be an African, imposing this kind of designation on people in Africa. You know what I'm saying? This is one of the things that was said, and I am going to just give that expression with one of these quotes from Sister Yvette. And she says this in the Dear Motherland video at about 47 minutes and 40 seconds in, yeah, where she talks about the fact that in the context for this is that she's talking about the whole video is premised on this idea, on this one article from a sister who is supposedly descending from a family in Nigeria of the Igbo people who sold slaves, quote unquote. All right. And so this was basically evidence of the fact that we and our brothers and sisters on the continent are not the same people. And at about 47 minutes in, she says, I don't think you understand. Like, we're wearing these shirts with these Nigerian gods. You got to understand. It's like the people, like they have these juju priests. Read the article about these juju priests. It's the weirdest thing. Y'all tell us we're all the same, but when y'all get in quiet corners, y'all start talking about how y'all Igbo and what tribe y'all from and all this stuff. You're fronting. This is a lie. You're fronting in front of me because you need me to feel like you need me as a Black American. Nah, American Black DOS. I'm American first. You're Nigerian first. Go do that. She says, goes on to say, so you need me to feel a certain way. You need me to feel like we're all the same, but that ain't what you really say. You ain't got away from that. You're Igbo. You know that. You come over here and you traffic off my lineage, and you know you need me to feel that, and you know you can take advantage of my people because we're lost. My people been lost because we feel like we don't want to own America because America been bad to us, but we can't go nowhere, so we're lost. So you take advantage of my people's lostness. That's over with. I just want you to know that's over with because we're coming and ain't nobody playing games with you no more. And she goes on, there are many statements where her and brother Tone are rejecting African identity. One of the statements that are made in the article, African Americans are much more than Africans in America, is one thing that African Americans were not, was African. He says that definitively in that particular article. So as me, myself, my lineage is Jamaica, Antigua, you know what I'm saying? And I define myself as an African. All of you can feel free. I'll start with Brother Abiola. Why is it, yeah, that Pan-Africanists affirm an African identity over and above any of the quote unquote nationalities that might apply to us in terms of where we are born or where we live?
There are many reasons, and certainly not in order. But first, people that we are calling Ivorians or Ghanaians or Nigerians or Senegalese, all of those identities are actually fake identities, because if we take Ivory Coast, it's a name that has been selected, designed by the French. It doesn't mean anything in any African language. So I think we need first to understand what is very important about our own identity before taking fake identities as something that is important. So Ivorian, that doesn't exist. So I can define myself because it is a choice. I can define myself as Ivorian, or I can define myself as an African living in Ivory Coast or coming from Ivory Coast. And I prefer that because African has some meaning. I'm African because my name means something. I'm African because my family behave in a certain way, because singing has a meaning in my culture, because dancing has a meaning in my culture, because solidarity has a meaning in my culture. The first time I saw someone sleeping in the street was when I came to Europe. I could never imagine that someone will live in the street and nobody will care, because in Africa, that is something we were not used to. So that cultural element is African. Either I am Igbo, either I am Akan, either I am Yoruba. It doesn't matter. We share some common ground. And you can see that that common ground has come to the US, has come to Haiti, has come to Jamaica. And we find that same common cultural ground. So that is why I think, as a Pan-Africanist, it's better to define oneself as African, because that's something real, other than something that has been imposed to us. So that's the first reason. And the second reason is, again, we have some serious problems, and the world is shaped by power. So I can choose a weak identity that guarantees that I will be defeated, or I can choose an identity that is bigger and stronger, that can give me hope that I will win, or at least I will be among the winners. So that's why.
All right, beautiful. Sister African, I'm gonna come to you next, yeah, but just after I read this particular quote from the Pan-Africanism is Dead video, as expounded by Sister Yvette Carnell. She says one of the things that she doesn't understand, the person who she's referring to, who wrote an article that she's referencing, is that, and that a lot of people don't understand about who we are as Black American descendants of slaves, is that we are descendants of slaves and slave masters. But what we always try to do, ladies and gentlemen, is we always try to erase that white slave master. Even though that Black female slave, she had no control over her body. So we know what that led to. And so we like to have this erasure and say we are African. I am African, yeah? And she says, no, you're not just African. First of all, you're not African. First of all, what is African? Yeah, all this ambiguity about what African is. Sister African Esquire, you're not African, my sis. Why are you trying to harp on this African identity for? You get me? Why are you begging people's identity and acting like you're an African when even the Africans in Africa don't even call themselves African?
I think a big part of the issue with Yvette Carnell is that she lives in the reality of white supremacy. And what I mean by that is that she lives within the confines of what has been created for her. So to her, you know, she sees the continent of Africa, she sees Nigeria, she sees Ghana, she sees all these different countries, and she sees a fragmented continent, and she says, this is what reality is. She's not visualizing the fact, first of all, that prior to, prior to the 1800s, this wasn't the reality. She's not understanding that, number one, but not only that, she's not envisioning that if Africa for so long was free, it could be free again. So she's going by what she's been taught. She's going by what white supremacy has taught her that Africans can be. Now, as far as the argument that, well, you have other lineage inside of you, therefore you should not call yourselves African American. And the first thing that we have to understand is the fact is that the system of white supremacy has recognized that if you have identifiable African features, that you will be treated as an African person. You'll be subjected to the abuses that African people are going to be subjected to. Mm-hmm. It doesn't make a differentiation if you're light skinned, if you're dark skinned, it doesn't. So we live in that reality. And so the same way that I said that Pan-Africanism is a reaction to white supremacy, mm-hmm. We have a political status that unites all of us, and that is of being of African descent. Mm-hmm. So I think that as far as Yvette, I think it's very interesting that she's not shy about the fact that she has European ancestry, but she is shy about the fact that she has African ancestry.
Mm-hmm.
And in that regard, I have had to conclude that a lot of this is just self-hatred.
Mm-hmm.
The verbiage that she uses in regard to Africans, the way that she talks down to them, I've never seen her ever talk that way about Europeans, even the Europeans that enslaved your ancestors. You have more vitriol towards your own, towards the people who are African than you do towards the people who took you out of Africa,
Mm-hmm.
and the people who subjected you to 400 years of slavery. I can never understand that.
Mm-hmm.
And I think a lot of her view is that when you consider, you know, the slave trade, some Africans were involved with the process. We know that that's true. We also know that, number one, it was not all Africans. You could not take a survey and figure out who was involved with what 200 years later or 400 years later. You cannot actually figure out who was involved with what. Not only that, we know that a lot of those same Africans that did participate in the slave trade also became slaves. They also became victims of the slave trade. So we not only have blood in us from the people who were captured, but a lot of us have blood in us from the people who actually participated. So what are we going to have the same vitriol towards ourselves? And then you go to our history in America. There's been African Americans who have enslaved, particularly in, I believe, Louisiana, who have enslaved other African Americans. So are we going to go have vitriol towards them? Are we going to go to people who were descended from house slaves and say that, oh, you had privileges on the plantation, or you sold your other fellow slaves out, and you're descended from those people, therefore we're going to have a negative relationship with you from here on out? That's my issue. I don't understand. Where's the timeline? When do we begin to say that we're going to start holding grudges against the sins of our ancestors instead of actually organizing for our own good? So where's the timeline? Where's the stopping point?
Mm-hmm.
She's never identified that. She's never articulated that.
Mm-hmm.
But I think it's very, arbitrary to pick a time in history where you want to start putting the blame on your brothers and sisters.
Right. And in that narrative as well, she didn't drive home this point. And I didn't note down exactly what she said, because I'm going to come back to that. But she did allude to the fact that effectively they owe us too. These Africans on the continent, they owe us some reparations too. Yeah, which is a very problematic concept, which we'll probably have to deal with at another point.